My father didn't just disown me, he put me on an auction block. At 17 and 8 months pregnant, I was sold for $50 silver to a man I'd never met. I thought my life was over, until the mountain man leaned in and whispered 5 words that changed everything. You're not property. You're free. If you were moved by Clara and Cain's journey from cruelty to kindness, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories of redemption. What would you have done in Cain's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. The dust devils danced across Main Street in Dust Creek as Clara stood on the auction block, her swollen belly pressing against the faded cotton of her dress. At 17, she was 8 months pregnant, profoundly obese, and utterly alone. Her father, Jebediah, sat on his horse 30 feet away, his weathered face twisted with disgust as he counted the silver dollars a 3rd time. 50 pieces. That was her worth to him, the price of washing his hands of the daughter who had shamed his name. The townspeople gathered in clusters, their whispers cutting like knives. Mrs. Henderson clutched her Bible and shook her head in righteous condemnation. The butcher's sons pointed and laughed, making crude gestures about her size. Even Reverend Walsh looked away, unwilling to meet her eyes. Clara's hands trembled as she placed them protectively over her unborn child, the only innocent in this parade of cruelty. Sold to the mountain man, the auctioneer declared, his voice devoid of ceremony. He gestured dismissively toward the figure who had placed the bid. Take her and be done with it. Clara forced herself to look at the man who had bought her. He stood apart from the crowd, as if the very air around him belonged to a different world. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against a worn leather vest. His arms were corded with muscle, visible even through his shirt sleeves, and when he moved, there was a controlled power in every motion. Dark hair fell to his collar, and a closely trimmed beard framed a strong jaw. But it was his eyes that held her, pale blue, almost gray, and completely unreadable. He climbed the platform steps without hurry, each footfall deliberate. When he reached her, he didn't grab her arm or issue commands. Instead, he extended his hand, palm up, waiting. My name is Cain, he said quietly, his voice like gravel smoothed by running water. And you're not property, Clara. You're free. The words made no sense. Clara stared at his outstretched hand, certain this was another form of mockery. But his expression held no cruelty, no mockery, only a steady patience that confused her more than violence would have. Come, he said simply. Let's get you away from here. Clara took his hand. His grip was strong but gentle, and he helped her down the steps with care, adjusting his pace to accommodate her awkward bulk. As they walked toward a sturdy wagon, Jebediah spurred his horse forward, blocking their path. You bought damaged goods, stranger, her father sneered, his breath reeking of whiskey even at this distance. Don't come crying when you realize what you got. Cain stopped. For a long moment, he simply looked at Jebediah with those pale eyes, and Clara felt her father's horse shift nervously beneath him. When Cain finally spoke, his voice was soft, but somehow more threatening than any shout. A man who sells his own daughter is no man at all. If I see you again, Jebediah, it won't end well for you. That's not a threat, it's a promise. Without waiting for a response, Cain guided Clara to the wagon and helped her onto the bench. The seat was padded with blankets, and there was a small pillow positioned for comfort. He had planned this, she realized. He had come prepared to care for her. As the wagon rolled out of Dust Creek, Clara looked back once. The town that had been her prison for 17 years grew smaller, then disappeared entirely as they entered the canyon country. The afternoon sun painted the red rock walls in shades of copper and gold, and for the first time in months, Clara allowed herself to take a full breath. The journey into the canyonlands took the rest of the day. Kane drove the wagon with practiced skill, navigating narrow trails that wound between towering stone walls. He spoke little, but every hour or so, he would stop to let Clara rest and stretch her legs. He offered water from a canteen and strips of dried meat wrapped in cloth. When she struggled to climb back onto the wagon, he lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing, his hands respectful, never lingering. As the sun began its descent, Clara studied him from the corner of her eye. Everything about Kane suggested strength held carefully in check. His forearms were thick with muscle, and when his vest shifted, she caught glimpses of a powerfully built torso beneath his shirt. But there was a stillness to him, a quietness that spoke of a man who had learned to be alone. "How much farther?" Clara finally asked, her voice rusty from disuse. "Another hour to the homestead," Kane replied. "The trail gets rougher, but the wagon can handle it. How are you feeling? Any pain?" The question surprised her. No one had asked about her comfort in months. "I'm tired, but I'm all right." He nodded and reached behind the seat, producing a folded blanket. "Evenings get cold in the canyons. Use this." Clara wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, and its warmth, both physical and metaphorical, made her throat tighten. She blinked back tears and focused on the changing landscape. The red rock gave way to pine forests as they climbed higher, and the air grew crisp with the scent of juniper and sage. When the homestead finally came into view, Clara's breath caught. The cabin sat in a natural amphitheater formed by curved canyon walls, with a clear stream running past the front door. Cottonwoods clustered around the water, their leaves shimmering gold in the fading light. Behind the cabin, a garden plot showed signs of careful tending, and a small barn housed what looked like 2 horses and a milk cow. Kane set the brake and jumped down, then came around to help Clara. Her legs were stiff and her back ached, but she managed to stand. He kept one hand on her elbow until she found her balance. "The cabin's small," he said, leading her toward the door. "1 room, but there's a partition I can put up for privacy." Inside, the cabin was clean and orderly. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, already laid with kindling and logs ready to light. A sturdy bed occupied the far corner, covered with a thick quilt. A table and 2 chairs sat near the window, and shelves lined the walls, holding supplies and tools. Everything was simple but well made, built to last. Kane moved to the fireplace and lit the fire with quick, efficient movements. Within minutes, warmth began spreading through the room. He filled a kettle with water from a bucket and set it on an iron hook over the flames. "Bed's yours," he said without looking at her. "I'll sleep in the barn until I can build an addition onto the cabin. There's a privy out back, and the stream water's good for drinking. I'll bring in more firewood, then make us some supper." Clara stood in the center of the room, overwhelmed. "I don't understand. Why did you buy me, if not to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Kane finally turned to face her, and in the firelight his features softened slightly. "I didn't buy you, Clara. I bought you freedom. There's a difference." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My wife died 3 years ago. Childbirth. The baby didn't make it either. I've been alone since then, and maybe I'll stay alone the rest of my life. But when I rode into Dust Creek and saw what your father was doing, I couldn't leave you there. So I paid the price he demanded, and now you're free to choose your own path." "Choose?" The word felt foreign on her tongue. "When the baby comes and you're ready to travel, I'll take you anywhere you want to go. A city back east where no one knows you? A town where you can start fresh? I'll give you enough money to get established." His pale eyes held hers steadily. "Or you can stay here if you prefer. No expectations, no obligations. Just a safe place to raise your child." Clara sank into one of the chairs, her hands moving instinctively to her belly where the baby kicked. Freedom, choice, safety. These were concepts she had almost forgotten existed. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them, and she buried her face in her hands. She felt, rather than heard, Kane move closer. A handkerchief appeared in her line of vision, clean and folded. She took it and wiped her eyes, struggling to compose herself. "I'm sorry," she managed. No one's been kind to me in so long." "Then they were fools," Kane said simply. He returned to the fireplace and began preparing food, giving her space to collect herself. Within 30 minutes he had beans heating in a pot, cornbread warming on a flat stone, and coffee brewing. The smells made Clara's stomach growl audibly. They ate in comfortable silence. The food was simple but good, seasoned with salt and wild onions. Clara ate slowly, savoring each bite, and Kane refilled her plate without comment when she finished. After supper, he heated water for washing and excused himself to tend the animals, leaving Clara alone to clean up and prepare for bed. When she finally lay down on the soft mattress, her body aching but her mind quiet for the first time in months, Clara heard Kane moving about outside. Through the window she could see lamplight in the barn. He had meant what he said. He would sleep out there, leaving her the comfort and privacy of the cabin. As sleep pulled her under, Clara allowed herself a small, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, her life had finally taken a turn towards something better. The days settled into a rhythm that Clara found both strange and comforting. She woke each morning to find the cabin warm, the fire already crackling, and Kane gone. He rose before dawn to tend the animals and check his trap lines, always returning with fresh water from the stream, and sometimes eggs from the chicken coop she hadn't noticed her first night. He would make breakfast, usually porridge or flapjacks, and they would eat together in companionable silence. After breakfast, Kane worked on the cabin addition he had promised. Clara watched from the window as he felled trees, stripped bark, and notched logs with practiced precision. His movements were economical, never wasted. When he removed his shirt in the afternoon heat, Clara caught her breath. His torso was ridged with muscle, his stomach showing the defined lines of what folks called a six-pack. Scars crisscrossed his back and chest, some old and silvered, others more recent. He was a man who had survived violence and hard living. Clara began contributing what she could. She was clumsy in the kitchen at first, her mother having died when she was young and Jebediah never caring whether she learned domestic skills. But Kane was patient, showing her how to season meat properly, how to keep bread from burning, how to make coffee strong enough to strip paint but smooth enough to drink. He never criticized her failures, only helped her understand what went wrong and how to improve. As her pregnancy advanced into its final weeks, Kane became even more attentive without being smothering. He brought a rocking chair from somewhere, she suspected he had carved it himself, and positioned it near the window where she could watch him work. He made sure she had water constantly available, and encouraged her to rest when her ankles swelled. When she mentioned craving fresh greens, he harvested wild plants from the canyon and prepared them exactly as she described wanting them. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the canyon walls, Clara finally gathered the courage to ask about his past. "You said your wife died in childbirth. What was her name?" Cain was silent for so long that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, quietly, "Sarah. We met in St. Louis. I was working as a scout for the Army, and she was a school teacher. Smartest woman I ever knew." His hands tightened on the armrests. "When we came out here, she loved it. Said it was like living in a painting. But when her time came..." He stopped, swallowed hard. "I rode for the doctor, but he was 3 hours away. By the time we got back, she was gone. Baby boy, stillborn." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "It's been 3 years. Some days are harder than others." He looked at her then, something vulnerable in his usually guarded eyes. "When I saw you on that platform, heavy with child and surrounded by cruelty, I saw Sarah. I saw what could have happened to her if circumstances had been different. I couldn't walk away." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "You're a good man, Cain." He shook his head. "I'm just a man trying to do right when I can. Haven't always succeeded." They sat together as darkness gathered, and Clara felt the baby kick strongly. Without thinking, she took Cain's hand and placed it on her belly. He froze, clearly uncertain. But then the baby kicked again, and his eyes widened. "Strong," he said, a small smile touching his lips. "That's a fighter in there." "I hope so," Clara whispered. "This world requires fighters." The next weeks passed with increasing intimacy, though not of a physical nature. They talked more, sharing stories of their pasts. Clara learned that Cain had been orphaned young, raised by a trapper who taught him to survive in the wilderness. He had served in the army during conflicts with various tribes, though he spoke of it with regret rather than pride. He had seen too much death and wanted only peace now. Clara shared her own story, a mother who died of fever when she was 10, a father who blamed her for it and grew increasingly cruel as whiskey consumed him. The pregnancy had resulted from a moment of poor judgment with a ranch hand who had disappeared the moment he learned she was with child. Jebediah had been furious, calling her every vile name imaginable and locking her in the barn for days at a time. The sale had been his final act of rejection. Cain listened without judgment, and when she finished, he simply said, "None of that was your fault, and your child will know better, I'll make sure of it." The pains started on a clear autumn morning. Clara woke to her water breaking, and she called out for Cain. He appeared instantly, fully dressed. He must have been awake already. His face went pale, but his hands were steady. "Is it time?" Clara nodded, unable to speak through the first contraction. Cain moved with swift efficiency. He boiled water, laid out clean clogs, and positioned everything within reach. When the pains grew worse, he supported her weight, letting her squeeze his hands until his knuckles went white. He spoke in a low, calm voice, reminding her to breathe, telling her she was strong, that she could do this. The labor lasted 12 hours. There were moments when Clara screamed, certain she would die, but Cain never wavered. He wiped her forehead with cool cloths, gave her sips of water, and when the final pushes came, he caught the baby with hands that shook only slightly. "A girl," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. A beautiful, healthy girl. He wrapped the baby in a soft blanket and placed her in Clara's arms. The infant had Clara's dark hair and a lusty cry that suggested strong lungs. Clara looked down at her daughter's face and felt something break open in her chest. A love so fierce and immediate that it hurt. Cain cleaned up efficiently, never making Clara feel embarrassed by the messiness of birth. When everything was tidy, he brought her broth and bread, insisting she eat to regain her strength. He had prepared a cradle, she noticed, beautifully carved with intricate designs of flowers and birds. "Made it while you was sleeping," he admitted when she mentioned it. "Just in case." Over the following days, Cain proved himself invaluable. He helped Clara learn to nurse, showing no discomfort with the intimacy required. He changed diapers without complaint and walked the baby when she cried at night so Clara could rest. He proved as gentle with the infant as he was skilled with an axe, and Clara watched him transform from a solitary man into something resembling a father. 3 weeks after the birth, on an unusually warm afternoon, the sound of hoofbeats shattered their peace. Clara was sitting in the rocking chair nursing the baby when Cain appeared in the doorway. His face was hard, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "It's your father," he said quietly, "and he brought the sheriff." Clara felt ice flood her veins. She pulled the baby closer, instinctively protective. Cain's jaw tightened. "Stay inside. I'll handle this." He stepped onto the porch as Jebediah and Sheriff Morrison rode into the clearing. Jebediah looked exactly as Clara remembered, cruel mouth, bloodshot eyes, shoulders hunched with perpetual anger. The sheriff, by contrast, appeared uncomfortable, his gaze darting nervously between the two men. "There he is," Jebediah announced loudly. "The man who stole my legacy." Cain stood perfectly still, his stance relaxed but ready. "You sold your daughter, Jebediah. I have witnesses and receipts to prove it." "The child is my blood," Jebediah snarled. "I want my granddaughter. A man's entitled to his legacy." "A man who sells his pregnant daughter has no rights to anything," Cain replied, his voice flat and cold. "You made your choice when you put her on that auction block. Now live with it." Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat. "Now, Cain, be reasonable. A grandfather has legal standing." "Does he?" Cain interrupted. He reached into his vest and pulled out a folded document, sealed with red wax. "This is a legal affidavit, filed with Territorial Judge Harrison 3 weeks ago. It documents the entire transaction between Jebediah and myself. How he sold his daughter in a public square, how I purchased her freedom, and how I witnessed his statements that she was dead to him." Cain's pale eyes fixed on the sheriff. "It also includes testimony from 4 citizens of Dust Creek who corroborated every detail." Jebediah's face turned purple. "You had no right." "I had every right. Judge Harrison reviewed the case and issued a declaration. Clara is emancipated from all parental control. The child is legally hers alone. And you, Jebediah, are forbidden from contacting either of them under penalty of arrest." Cain unfolded the document and showed it to the sheriff. "It's all there, Morrison. Judge's signature and seal." The sheriff read the document, his expression growing more uncomfortable by the second. Finally, he looked up at Jebediah with something resembling disgust. "He's right. Judge Harrison's rulings are law in this territory. You've got no claim here, Jebediah." "This is horse shit," Jebediah exploded. "I'm her father!" "You're the man who sold her," Cain corrected, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. The document also notes that trafficking one's own child is grounds for criminal prosecution. Judge Harrison was inclined to let it pass this once, provided you never contact Clara or her daughter again. But if you show up here one more time, I ride to Silver City and file charges. You'll spend 5 years in territorial prison. Your choice. The sheriff turned his horse. "Come on, Jebediah. You're not wanted here." For a moment, Clara's father looked like he might argue further, but something in Cain's stance, the absolute stillness of a man prepared for violence, made him reconsider. With a final curse, he wheeled his horse and galloped away. The sheriff followed, tipping his hat apologetically to Cain before disappearing down the trail. Cain stood on the porch until the hoofbeats faded completely. Only then did he allow his shoulders to relax. He turned to find Clara in the doorway, the baby in her arms. "It's over," he said gently. "He won't be back." Clara's legs gave out, and Cain was there instantly, catching her, guiding her back to the rocking chair. She clutched her daughter and wept, not from sadness, but from relief so profound it felt like drowning. Cain knelt beside the chair, one hand on her shoulder, silent and solid. When she finally composed herself, she looked at him through tear-blurred eyes. "You did all that? Filed papers with the judge? Got witnesses?" "The day after I brought you here," Cain confirmed. "I rode back to Dust Creek and documented everything. Couldn't risk him coming back and trying to take her from you." "Why?" The question burst from her. "Why go to so much trouble for me?" Cain was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. "Because you deserved someone to fight for you. Because that baby deserved a chance at a real life. And because—" he met her eyes. "Because somewhere along the way, you both became my reason for waking up in the morning." Clara's breath caught. The baby stirred in her arms, making small, contented noises. Outside, the canyon walls glowed gold in the afternoon light. "Cain," Clara said softly, "would you like to hold your daughter?" She saw understanding flash across his face, the significance of the word, your. He swallowed hard and nodded. Clara carefully transferred the baby to his arms, and he held her with the gentle confidence of someone who had done this before, in another life. The infant looked impossibly small against his broad chest. "She needs a name," Clara said. "I was thinking, Sarah, after your wife, if that's all right with you." Cain's eyes filled with tears. He looked down at the baby, at Sarah, and a single tear tracked down his weathered cheek. "It's more than all right. It's perfect." 2 months later, the circuit preacher came through the canyon country. Cain and Clara were married in front of the cabin, with Sheriff Morrison serving as witness. The lawman had returned a week earlier to apologize for his part in Jebediah's scheme, and to report that Clara's father had left the territory entirely, heading east with his tail between his legs. Clara wore a simple dress Cain had traded for at the general store in Silver City, and she carried wildflowers picked fresh that morning. Cain wore his best shirt and had trimmed his beard. Baby Sarah slept in her cradle on the porch, oblivious to the ceremony that made them officially a family. As the seasons turned, the cabin addition was completed, giving them a proper bedroom and a nursery for Sarah. Clara's body slowly recovered from pregnancy, though she remained heavy. Cain never commented on her size, except to say she was beautiful, and he said it often enough that she began to believe him. One spring evening, they sat together on the porch, watching Sarah take her first wobbling steps across the grass. She was 10 months old, determined and fearless. When she fell, she pulled herself right back up, laughing. "She has your spirit," Cain observed, his arm around Clara's shoulders. Clara leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "She has your courage." "She has both our love," Cain corrected. "That's all any child really needs." As darkness gathered over the canyon, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been sold, discarded, treated as less than human. But from that lowest point, she had found not just survival, but genuine happiness. She had found a man who saw her worth when no one else would. She had found a home in this wild, beautiful place. And she had found herself, not the broken girl her father had tried to destroy, but a woman, a mother, a wife. A shadow moved on the ridge above the cabin, just for a moment. Cain tensed slightly, his hand moving unconsciously toward the rifle leaning beside the door. But the shadow resolved into a deer, and he relaxed again. "Still watching," Clara murmured. "Always," Cain agreed. "The world can be cruel, but here, in this place, you're safe. Sarah's safe. I'll make sure of that." Clara took his hand and laced their fingers together. Whatever storms came, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they faced everything, together. The girl who had been sold like cattle had become a woman who had claimed her own destiny, and the lonely mountain man had found his reason for living again. Above them, stars began emerging one by one, transforming the darkening sky into a field of light. Tomorrow would bring its own work, its own struggles. But tonight they had this: a family, a home, and a love forged in the crucible of the harshest frontier. That was enough. That was everything.